Police are under pressure to probe Tory sleaze just days after the Owen Paterson row. With fresh allegations, donors who gave millions were rewarded with peerages.
MPs are holding an emergency debate on parliamentary standards later as the government continues to come under fire over the allegations. We are joined by the International Trade Secretary, Anne-Marie Trevelyan. Very good morning to you. I think
good morning.
Let's start with these allegations of sleaze. Because, frankly, when we talk about standards, you have come under criticism, not just from the opposition, which would be expected, but from your own side as well. Tobias Ellwood, who is chair of the Commons Defence Committee and is a Tory, said it was a dark week for British democracy. Former Prime Minister Sir John Major said the government was shameful, said Mr Johnson's administration is perhaps politically corrupt. Could your standards slip any lower?
So I don't recognise John Major's stance at all. The issue that created this discussion last week following the reports on Owen Paterson, and as the Leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, said, the error by us to conflate that report and the bigger question of whether the existing standard system should have a more robust appeals process for colleagues of whatever party if they find themselves being investigated is one that is raised, and I know that the debate that's going to be taking place this afternoon, I won't be there because I'm in Glasgow at COP26 talking about adaptation, but that discussion will no doubt raise those questions, and colleagues will highlight the anxieties they have about the robustness of the system as it stands. And I know that Mr Speaker is going to be listening closely and maybe making a statement later on how we can progress that wider question in the round of whether the system needs reviewing.
Yeah, well, you might not recognise that assessment, but the voters do, because as a result, the ratings for the Prime Minister and the party have slumped. I mean, this isn't just, as George Eustace, your colleague, has tried to describe it, a storm in a teacup. People think this stinks, that you tried to change the rules to help your own, and that there's something whiffy about people who are paid by lobbyists and the contracts that happen as a result, and people who pay millions of pounds to the party and then afterwards get promoted to the House of Lords.
So the question of paid lobbying is that is not allowed, and when these issues are raised, they are investigated, and the process follows due course and is independently assessed, which is a good thing. The question, and as Jacob Rees-Mogg said last week, there had been a conflation of a specific case with Owen Paterson and the wider question of whether the robustness of the system is adequate, and that will now be looked at. I think the question of those who are given peerages is one that should be considered much more widely. People who have been in business, who are very successful, financially very successful, and choose to share some of that with political parties, not only the Conservative Party but the Labour Party too, are sometimes put forward for peerages. There is a process to assess their probity as well. But I think the key point is there.
Just on that, Minister, you say there's a process. Minister, excuse me, forgive me.
Leaders.
You say there's a process to assess their integrity. Yes. One of the people who went to the House of Lords was turned down by the House of Lords Appointment Committee on the basis of probity, but was still put forward and went to the House of Lords on the backing of the Prime Minister. So are you arguing there's a process, but therefore there is a process, but we must ignore the process? I'm a little confused.
No, the Prime Minister of the day, and of course that changes from election to election, has the final say on that, and we see in the House of Lords a rich mixture of both business people. I think of someone like Lord Sugar, who gave large sums of money to the Labour Party, who brings huge experience and an understanding of what running businesses and that wealth creation that is a key part of our country's success. Without wealth creators like Lord Sugar, like some of the Conservative Party treasurers, we would not be making progress.
You argued there was a process. Part of the process is approval by the House of Lords Appointments Committee. One of those former Tory treasurers was turned down by the House of Lords Appointments Committee, saying they did not think it was an appropriate appointment, and was overruled by the Prime Minister. If we're going to have that, what is the point of having a process if the process is going to be ignored?
So the Prime Minister always has the final say. The Prime Minister of the day always has the final say, as have other Prime Ministers in the past. And we move forwards. I think that my key point is that I think it's very important that we have a mix of experienced voices in the House of Lords. Chris Bryant and I regularly disagree on whether this should be an elected chamber or not. I think the variations that come from appointments brings extraordinary skills and voices of importance to help us as legislators in the House of Commons to refine and improve the legislation that we make, and they are a critical part of that.
Can you not see that the voters are perceiving a pattern here, which is that there is a process, there are rules, but we either ignore them or change them when they don't suit us?
So everything about the way Parliament works is worked on consensus, and we work through it. As the standards issue, which obviously has raised lots of issues last week, the question is if we as parliamentarians feel cross-party that it's not working as it should, we can, as a corporate body, discuss together and think about how we can improve that. And in the case of the Standards Committee, I know that we will see the Speaker, Lindsay Hoyle, listening closely to debate today and questioning that. And that's the beauty of our Parliament, is that we are all part of the process, and those independent bodies that are there to help us, we help them with the framework to make sure that it's as robust as it can be. And this continues and changes all the time. Over decades, these things change as the environment we live in changes, and I have no doubt that will continue to be the case. We have one of the most robust parliaments in the world. As I'm talking about adaptation, I've been travelling the world meeting leaders from across our amazing planet. We have a very robust system which is well respected and looked to by so many countries who want the UK to lead in all the issues that we're dealing with at COP26 here today, thinking about how to support those most vulnerable countries, not only in parliamentary terms, in the governance that they have in their own parliaments, to make sure that we can support them.
Forgive me, I will ask you about your announcement in a moment. I just want to ask one question. I want to ask you as a person. I'm sure you went into politics because you wanted change for the right reasons. I'm sure you believe in the work you do, and you are a member of the government. And as a member of a government and a public servant, you are accountable, as is the government, to the 7 Nolan principles in public life, which, for those who don't know, are selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty and leadership. Do you believe in forcing through a vote when somebody had already been suspended from Parliament to try and get that vote overturned, that the government of you are a part of, hand on heart, acted selflessly with integrity, objectivity and honesty? Do you, hand on heart, as a public servant who spent your career and life doing this, believe that that was a selfless act by the government?
So I think the Leader of the House, Jacob Rees-Mogg, has been very clear that there was an error made in conflating the wider question of an appeals system
so it wasn't selfless
for colleagues, should they need it, and the separate one. So, well, he set out, he think it was an error.
I'm asking you, Minister, I'm asking you, was it a selfless act?
So I agree with Jacob. I agree with Jacob that conflating the two was the wrong thing to do, and that's why the situation was amended the next day.
Let me ask you about your announcement today. You're putting £300 million of money into a climate announcement. Tell us a little about that.
So today is Adaptation Day at COP26, where we focus on the most vulnerable countries, those most impacted now already by climate shocks, and as part of the 11.6 billion commitment of climate finance that we make into the wider global pot, today we're announcing an extra £290 million going directly to adaptation funds. So where those most vulnerable communities across the planet, in those most vulnerable countries, a lot of them small island developing states, and the poorest are going to be able to access funding to help them do local projects. So when I've been travelling this year, for instance, cocoa farmers who need to change the tree cover to ensure that the rising temperatures don't damage the cocoa plants, helping them to plant differently and manage their small farms differently.
And just a quick fact check, am I right to think that this £290 million is actually spread over 7 years, so it's £40 million a year, and is part of the 0.5% already promised of international development, so it's just an allocation of funds rather than any new money?
So it's new money into the adaptation fund.
But it's still part of the International Development Fund, isn't it?
Forward.
It's part of the 0.5%.
So our commitment is 11.6 billion, and indeed the Prime Minister said last week that if the economics of the UK allow, we'll be adding another billion to that overall.
So this isn't new money; it's just a new allocation of money.
Incredibly urgent territory. So it's finding funds that will go directly into the adaptation to help those most vulnerable countries to be able to tackle some of those real shocks that are happening now.
All right, I need to, before we let you go, I just need to talk to you about Richard Ratcliffe, because we spoke to him earlier. He's now done more than 2 weeks on a hunger strike because his wife, Nazanin, is still being held in Iran. When are you going to help Nazanin come home?
So I know that the Foreign Secretary has been continuing to have very close discussions and making representations to the Iranian government on this. It's something that she does day and night. It was one of the first things she did, and she will continue to do so. We all want to see Nazanin come home as soon as possible.
Right, so the Iranian Vice President is at COP26 this week. Will there be direct face-to-face discussions about it?
I don't have any information on the FCDO team's activities, I'm afraid, but I know that the Foreign Secretary continues to make this a priority in all the work that she does.
Do you hold out hope that Nazanin's going to come home? Because Richard describes his wife as a hostage and says that unless the £400 million debt is paid back, she isn't likely to be freed.
So I know that the Foreign Secretary is very focused on this, and she will continue to work with all that she has and the advocacy of many others to speak up for Nazanin and to campaign to see her home. We send, as ever, our greatest sympathies to Richard and their family in this really difficult time.
Minister, we appreciate your time this morning. Thank you very much for joining us.
Pleasure.